Grimm's fairy tales have brought magic and delight to millions throughout the generations and all over the world. They connect the oral folk tales of their time with their slightly dark origins, different from fairy tales that you are used to reading. In this book, there are timeless classics such as Little Red Cap, Little Red Riding Hood, Briar Rose, Sleeping Beauty, Beauty and the Beast, Hansel and Gretel, Rumpelstiltskin, Snow White, Tom Thumb, Cinderella, Rapunzel, and 55 more. Don't you just love getting a new book and you can just feel that it's new, that it hasn't been opened because of how flat the spine is and how unbent the pages are? Briar Rose, Sleeping Beauty. A king and queen once upon a time reigned in a country a great way off, where there were in those days fairies. Now this king and queen had plenty of money and plenty of fine clothes to wear and plenty of good things to eat and drink and a coach to ride out in every day. But though as they had been married for many years, they had no children, and this grieved them very much indeed. But one day, as the queen was walking by the side of the river at the bottom of the garden, she saw a poor little fish that had thrown itself out of the water and lay gasping and nearly dead on the banks. Then the queen took pity on the little fish and threw it back in to the river, and before it swam away it lifted its head and said, "I know what your wish is, and it shall be fulfilled. For returning your kindness to me, you will soon have a daughter." The little fish had foretold soon came to pass, and the queen had a little girl, so very beautiful that the king could not cease looking on it for joy. And he said he would hold a great feast and make merry and show this child all the land, so he could ask his kinsmen, noblemen, and friends and neighbours. But the queen said, "I will have the fairies also, that they might be kind and good to our little daughter." Now there were 13 fairies in the kingdom, but as the king and queen had only 12 golden dishes for them to eat out of, they were forced to leave one of the fairies without asking her. So 12 fairies came, each without asking her. So 12 fairies came, each with a high red cap on her head, red shoes, with heels on their feet, and long white wands in their hands. After the feast was over, they gathered around in a ring and gave all their best gifts to the little princess. One gave her goodness, another beauty, another riches, and so on, until she had all that was good in the world. Just as 11 of them had done blessing her, a great noise was heard in the courtyard, and word was brought that the 13th fairy was come, with a black cap on her head, black shoes on her feet, and a broomstick in her hand, and pressed up as she came into the dining hall. Now, as she had not been asked to the feast, she was very angry, and scolded the king and queen very much, and set to work to take her revenge. So she cried out, "The king's daughter shall in her 15th year be wounded by a spindle and fall down dead." Then the 12 So he ordered that all the spindles in the kingdom should be brought up and burnt, with all the gifts for the first 11 fairies were in the meantime fulfilled. For the princess was so beautiful and well behaved and good and wise that everyone who knew her loved her. It happened that on the very day she was 15 years old, the king and queen were not at home, and she was left alone in the palace as she roved around by herself and looked at all the rooms and chambers, till at last she came to an old tower, to which there was a narrow staircase, ending with a little door. In the door there was a golden key, and when she turned it, the door sprang open, and there sat an old lady spinning away very busily. "Why, how now, good mother," said the princess. "What are you doing here?" "Spinning," said the old lady, and nodded her head, humming a tune. "Well, buzz." Buzz went the wheel. "How prettily that little thing turns around," said the princess, and took the spindle and began to try to spin. But scarcely had she touched it before the fairy's prophecy was fulfilled. The spindle wounded her, and she fell down lifeless on the ground. However, she was not dead, but had only fallen into a deep sleep, and the king and the queen who had just come, all their court fell asleep too, and the horses slept in the stable, and the dogs in the court, the pigeons on the housetop, and the fairies, and the very flies slept upon the walls. Even the fire on the hearth left off blazing, and she went to sleep. The jack stopped, and the spit was turned out with a goose upon it, for the king's dinner stood still. And the cook, who was at that moment pulling the kitchen boy by the hair to give him a box on the ears for something he had done amiss, let him go, and fell asleep. The butcher, who was slyly tasting the ale, fell asleep with the jug at his lips, and thus everything stood still and slept soundly. A large hedge of thorns soon grew around the palace, and every year it became higher and higher and thicker, till at last the old palace was surrounded and hidden, so not even the roof or the chimneys could be seen. But there was a report through the land of a beautiful sleeping briar rose, for so the king's daughter was called, so that from time to time several kings' sons came and tried to break through the thicket into the palace. This, however, none of them could ever do, for the thorns and bushes laid hold on them, as if it were with hands, and there they stuck fast and died wretchedly. After many, many years there came a king's son into the land, and an old man told him the story of the thicket of thorns, and how a beautiful palace stood behind it, and how a wonderful princess called Briar Rose lay to sleep with all of her court. He told too how he had heard from his grandfather that many princes had come and had tried to break through the thicket, but they had all stuck fast in and died. Then the young prince said, "All this shall not frighten me. I will go and I will see this briar rose." The old man tried to hinder him, but he was bent upon going. Now that very day, the 100 years were ended, and the prince came to the thicket. He saw nothing but beautiful flower shrubs, through which he went with ease, and they shut in after him, as thick as ever. Then he came at last to the palace, and there in the court lay the dogs asleep, and the horses were standing in the stables, and the rose sat on the pigeon, and on the room sat the pigeons fast asleep, with their heads under their wings. And when he came into the palace, the flies were sleeping on the walls, the spit was standing still, the butler had the jug of ale at his lips. Going to drink, Then she began to bewail her loss and said, "Alas, if I could only get my ball again, I would give all my fine clothes and jewellery and everything I have in this world." While she was speaking, a frog put his head out of the water and said, "Princess, why do you weep so bitterly?" "Alas," she said, "what can you do for me, you nasty frog? My golden ball has fallen into the spring." The frog said, "I want not your pearls and jewels and fine clothes, but if you will love me and let me live with you and eat from you off your golden plate and sleep upon your bed, I will bring you your ball again." "What nonsense," thought the princess. "This silly frog is talking. He can never even get out of the spring to visit me, though he may be able to get my ball for me, and therefore I will tell him he shall have what he asks." "Well, if you will bring me my ball, I will do all you ask." Then the frog put his head down and dived deep under the water. And after a little while he came back up again, with the ball in his mouth, and he threw it on the edge of the spring. As soon as the young princess saw her ball, she ran to pick it up, and she was so overjoyed to have it in her hands again that she never thought of the frog but ran home with it as fast as she could. The frog called after her, "Stay, princess, and take me with you as you said," but she did not stop to hear a word. The next day, just as the princess had sat down to dinner, she heard a strange noise, tap, tap, splash, splash, as if something was coming up the marble staircase, and soon afterwards there was a gentle knock on the door, and a little voice cried out and said, "Open the door, my princess dear, open the door to thy true love here, and mind the words that thou I said, by the fountain cool in the greenwood shade." Then the princess ran to the door and opened it, and there she saw the frog, whom she had quite forgotten. At this sight she was sadly frightened, and shutting the door as fast as she could, came back to her seat. The king, her father, seeing that something had frightened her, asked her what was the matter. "There's a nasty frog," she said, "at the door, that lifted my ball for me out of the spring this morning. I told him that he should live with me here, thinking he would never get out of the spring, but there he is at the door, and he wants to come in." While she was speaking, the frog knocked again at the door and said, "Open the door, my princess dear, open the door to thy true love here, and mind the words that thou and I said, by the fountain cool in the greenwood shade." Then the king said to the young princess, "As you have given your word, you must keep it, so go and let him in." She did so, and the frog hopped into the room, and straight on, tap, tap, splash, splash, from the bottom of the room to the top, till he came up close to the table where the princess sat. "Pray lift me upon the chair," said he to the princess, "and let me sit next to you." As soon as she had done this, the frog said, "Put your plate nearer to me, that I may eat out of it." This she did, and when he had eaten as much as he could, he said, "Now I am tired. Carry me upstairs and put me into your bed." The princess thought very unwillingly, took him up in her hands and put him upon the pillow of her own bed, where he slept all night long. As soon as it was light, he jumped up, hopped downstairs, and went out of the house. "Now then," thought the princess, "at last he is gone, and I shall be troubled with him no more." But she was mistaken, for when night came again, she heard the same tapping at the door, and the frog came once more and said, "Open the door, my princess dear, open the door to thy true love here, and mind the words that thou and I said, by the fountain cool in the greenwood shade." And when the princess opened the door, the frog came in and slept upon her pillow as before, till morning broke, and the third night he did the same. But when the princess awoke the following morning, she was astonished to see, instead of the frog, a handsome prince gazing on her with the most beautiful eyes she had ever seen, and standing at the head of her bed. but not enough. So he took the miller's daughter to a yet larger heap, and said, "This must be spun tonight, and if it is, you shall be my queen." As soon as she was alone, the dwarf came in and said, "What will you give me to spin gold for you this third time?" "I have nothing left," said she. "Then say you will give me," said the little man, "the first little child that you may have when you are queen." "That may never be," thought the miller's daughter, and she knew no other way to get her task done. She said she would do what he asked. Round went the wheel again, to the old song, and the mannikin once more spun to the heap of gold, the heap into gold. The king came in the morning, finding all he wanted, and was forced to keep his word. He married the miller's daughter, and she really became queen. At the birth of her first little child, she was very glad and forgot the dwarf and what he had said. But one morning she came into her room where she was sitting playing with her baby, and put her in mind of it. Then she grieved sorely at her misfortune, and said she would give him all the wealth of the kingdom if he would let her off, but in vain, till at last her tears softened, and he said, "I will give you 3 days' grace, and if during that time you can tell me my name, you shall keep your child." Now the queen lay awake all night thinking of odd names that she could have heard, and sent the messenger all over the land to find new ones. The next day the little man came, and she began with Timothy, Ishabod, Benjamin, Jeremiah, and all the names she could remember. But to all and each of them he said, "Madam, that is not my name." The second day he began with all the comical names she could hear, Bandy-legs, Hunchback, Crookshanks, and so on. But the little gentleman said still to every one of them, "Madam, that is not my name." The third day one of the messengers came back and said, "I have travelled 2 days without hearing of any other names, but yesterday I was climbing a hill among the trees of the forest, where the fox and the hare bid each other good night. I saw a little hut, and before the hut burnt a fire, and round about the fire a funny little dwarf was dancing upon one leg and singing, 'Merrily the feast I'll make, tomorrow I'll brew, tomorrow I'll bake, merrily I'll dance and sing, for next day I will a stranger bring. Little does my lady dream, Rumpelstiltskin is my name.' When the queen heard of this, she jumped for joy, and as soon as her little friend came, she sat down upon her throne and called her court around to enjoy the fun. And the nurse stood by her side with the baby in her arms, as if it was quite ready to be given up. And the little man began to chuckle at the thought of having her poor child to take home with him to his hut in the woods, and he cried out, "Now, lady, what is my name?" "Is it John?" asked she. "No, madam." "Is it Tom?" "No, madam." "Is it Jemmy?" "It is not." "Can your name be Rumpelstiltskin?" said the lady slyly. "Some witch told you that, some witch told you that," cried the little man, and dashed his right foot into in a rage so deep into the floor that he was forced to lay hold of it with both hands to pull it out. Then he made the best of his way off, while the nurse laughed and the baby crawled, and all the court cheered him for having so much trouble for nothing, and said, "We wish you a very good morning and a merry feast, Mr. Rumpelstiltskin." Now I will read Cinderella. A rich man's wife became sick, and when she felt that her end was drawing near, she called her only daughter to her bedside, and said, "Dear child, remain pious and good, and then our dear God will always protect you, and I will look down on you from heaven and be near you." With this she closed her eyes and died. The girl went out of her because she had to do all the work from the morning until evening, get up before daybreak and carry water, make the fires, cook and wash. Besides this, the sisters did everything imaginable to hurt her. They made fun of her, scattered peas and lentils into the ashes for her, so that she had to sit and pick all of them out. In the evening, when she had worked herself weary, there was no bed for her. Instead, she had to sleep by the hearth in the ashes, and because she had always looked dusty and dirty, they called her Cinderella. One day it happened that her father was going to the fair, and he asked his two stepdaughters what he should bring back for them. Beautiful dresses, said the one, pearls and jewels, said the other. And you, Cinderella, he said, what do you want? Father, break off for me the first twig that brushes against your hat on your way home. So he brought beautiful dresses, pearls and jewels for his stepdaughters. On his way home, as he was riding through a green thicket, a hazel twig brushed against him and knocked off his hat. Then he broke off the twig and took it with him. Arriving home, he gave his stepdaughters the things they had asked for, and gave Cinderella the twig from the hazel bush. Cinderella thanked him and went to her mother's grave and planted the branch. As she wept so much, her tears fell upon it and watered it. It grew and became a beautiful tree. Cinderella went to this tree 3 times every day, and beneath it, if she wept and prayed, a white bird came to the tree every time. And whenever she expressed a wish, the bird would throw down to her what she had wished for. Now it happened that the king proclaimed a festival that was to last 3 days, and all the beautiful young girls in the land were invited, so that his son could select a bride for himself. When the 2 stepdaughters heard that they too had been invited, they were in high spirits, and they called Cinderella, saying, "Comb our hair for us, brush our shoes, and fasten our buckles. We are going to the festival at the king's castle." Cinderella obeyed, but wept because she too would have liked to go to the dance with them. She begged her stepmother to allow her to go. "You, Cinderella," she said, "you are covered in dust and dirt, and you want to go to the festival. You have neither clothes nor shoes, and yet you want to dance." However, because Cinderella kept asking, the stepmother finally said, "I have scattered a bowl of lentils into the ashes for you. If you can pick them out again in 2 hours, you may go with us." The girls went through the back door into the garden and called out, "You tame pigeons, you turtle doves, and you birds beneath the sky, come and help me to gather. The good ones go into the deep bird threw a gold and silver dress down to her, and slippers embroidered with silk and silver. She quickly put on the dress and went to the festival. Her stepsisters and her stepmother did not recognize her. They thought she must be a foreign princess, for she looked so beautiful in her golden dress. They never once thought it was Cinderella, for they thought she was sitting at home in the dirt looking for lentils in the ash. The princess approached her, took her by the hand, and danced with her. Furthermore, he would dance with no one else. He never let her hand go. Whenever anyone else came and asked her to dance, he would say, "She's my dance partner." She danced until evening, and then she wanted to go home, but the prince said, "I will go along and escort you," for he wanted to see who the beautiful girl belonged to. However, she eluded him and jumped into the pigeon coop. The prince waited until her father came, and then he told him that the unknown girl had jumped into the pigeon coop. The old man thought, could it be Cinderella? He had them bring him an axe and pick so he could break the pigeon coop apart, but no one was inside. When they got home, Cinderella was lying in the ashes, dressed in her dirty clothes. A dim lit oil lamp burning in the fireplace. Cinderella had quickly jumped down from the back of the pigeon coop and run to the hazel tree. There she had taken off her beautiful clothes and laid them on the grave, and the birds had taken them away again. Then, dressed in her grey smocks, she had returned to the ashes in the kitchen. The next day, when the festival began anew, and her parents and stepsisters had gone again, Cinderella went to the hazel tree and said, "Shake and quiver, little tree, throw gold and silver down to me." Then the bird threw down an even more magnificent dress. Then on the preceding day, when Cinderella appeared out in the festival in this dress, everyone was astonished at her beauty. The prince had waited until she came, then immediately took her by the hand and danced with only her. When others came and asked her to dance with them, he said, "She's my dance partner." When evening came, she wanted to leave, and the prince followed her, wanting to see into which house she went, but she ran away from him and into the garden behind the house. A beautiful tall tree stood there, on which hung the most magnificent pearls. She climbed nimbly as a squirrel into the branches, and the prince did not know where she had gone. He waited until her father came and said to him, "The unknown girl has eluded me, and I believe she has climbed up into the pear tree." The father thought, could it be Cinderella? He had an axe brought to him and cut down the tree, but no one was in it. When they came to the kitchen, Cinderella was lying in the ashes as usual, for she had jumped down from the other side of the tree and taken the beautiful dress back to the bird in the hazel tree, and had put on her grey smocks. On the third day, when her parents and sister had gone away, Cinderella went again to her mother's grave and said to the tree, "Shake and quiver, little tree, throw silver and gold down to me." This time the bird threw down to her a dress that was even more splendid and magnificent than anything she had yet to see, and the slippers were pure gold. When she arrived at the festival in this dress, everyone was so astonished they did not know what to say. The prince danced with only her, and whenever anyone else asked to dance, he would say, "She is my dance partner." When evening came and Cinderella wanted to leave, the prince tried to escort her, but she ran away from him so quickly that he could not follow her. The prince, however, had set a trap. He had the entire stairway smeared with pitch. When she ran down the stairs, her left slipper stuck to the pitch. The prince picked it up. It was small and dainty, and of pure gold. The next morning he went with it to the man and said to him, "No one shall be my wife except for the one whose foot fits in his golden shoe." The two sisters were happy to hear this, for they and went out to the prince. He took her